Good morning. My name is Kathy Bradshaw, a member of your worship committee or team, and I'd like to welcome you today to our celebration. I need to do some Board of Trustees announcements for today, and the board will meet again on Thursday. At this time, the church is closed until at least the 30th. And then next Sunday is Reverend Suzel's last word. So please be sure to dial in. Whoever you are, from wherever you come, you are welcome here. Whomever you love, however you define family, you are welcome here. Whatever the color of your skin, the language of your grandparents, the cultures that move in your being, the abilities and disabilities you hold, we welcome you. Whatever you believe, whatever your theology, prayer, sacrament, even if none at all, we welcome you. We are a community of communities, spiritual seekers acting out our faith in justice, united in covenant, and the spirit of love. We welcome all of you. Welcome to this beloved community. Our special guest today is Beth Monhollen. And Beth began on her UU path over 20 years ago. And since 2013, she is an official member of First Church of Milwaukee. And it was there that she first began to discern her call to ministry that would allow her to use her skills gained as a writer, actor, educator for the spiritual development of others. Beth worked at Alverno College for 18 years, serving as an academic advisor for undergraduate students, teaching various courses, including Intro to Theater. Her time there concluded in May 2021, when her path led her to complete an intensive chaplaincy training during that summer at Selber Family Hospice. She is officially halfway finished with her Master of Divinity program at Meadville Lombard Theological School and is a quarter of the way through a multi-platform ministry internship with WellSprings UU in Chester, Pennsylvania. Beth's theology is grounded on experiencing the divine through our interconnections and interdependence with one another, and it is a form from that sense of connection that she offers gratitude to Reverend Denise for the invitation to share a sermon with UUCW, and to the entire UUCW for their committed work to this community. She is also grateful to her partner, Daniel Pugliese, apologize to Daniel, and their 3 rescue pets for unending love and support. And I would like to introduce today hymn number 128, For All That Is Our Life.
For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use, to build the common good, and make our own days glad. For needs which others serve, for services we give, for work and its rewards, for hours of rest and love, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life. For sorrow we must bear, for failures, pain, and loss, for each new thing we learn, for fearful hours that pass, we come with praise and thanks. For all that is our life. For all that is our life, we sing our thanks and praise. For all life is a gift, which we are called to use, to build the common good, and make our own days glad.
If you are online with us, please kindle your chalice at home. Life without communion with others would be less fulfilling, no matter the extent of one's love. Most of us find that space of healing community with like-minded souls. Other individuals recover themselves in their communion with the divine spirit, where we can claim the space of accountability and renew our commitment to that transformation of spirit that opens the heart and prepares us to love and makes it possible for us to enter a space of compassion that wakens us to the healing power of service, which is love in action.
Thank you for starting us off today, Kathy. You did a fine job recovering from preparations that went awry. Good morning. I'm Dave Cicero, Director of Lifespan Religious Education here at UU Church West, and my pronouns are he and his. I'm so glad you've chosen to spend some time with us today, and I hope you find some meaning in it. These cold winter days call out for warm, hearty dishes like stew or soup, don't they? Just thinking about that reminds me of a grad student in my college sculpture program who often made a huge pot of soup on critique days. These were days when we would all share what we'd been working on and invite feedback from others. It would be an all-day event, and it was great to be able to take a lunch break with a chunk of crusty bread and a bowl of warm soup. But I'm pretty sure Fred never used a recipe, just whatever was available. I always admired that. It also reminds me of a story I'm going to share, which some of you may already know. It's been told many ways, but it usually involves a stranger who arrives in a neighborhood and appears to be setting up to spend the night. The people there see her come, and they come out to suggest that there's nothing available in the area to eat, so she might as well just keep moving on. Not very welcoming, are they? But the traveler explains that, she's just fine with some stone soup, which she's more than happy to make and share with them. Well, the people are kind of puzzled by this, but she starts a fire. And puts a pot of water on to boil, adding a large stone. After a while, the villagers, of course, the people in the neighborhood are quite curious about this. Yeah, come on to the side of the table. We'll just kind of leave it over there. And after a while, she tastes the broth, declaring, it's almost ready. It's a shame, though, that we don't have a bit of cabbage for it. Cabbage really brings out the stone flavor. Oh, Kathy, we have some cabbage? Fantastic. That's going to really help. It's really too bad we don't have any carrots too, though, because the old gnarly ones, the old ones that people sometimes just throw out, those really work great too. Beth, really? Wonderful. Boy, that's really smelling great. I bet it's going to taste good, too. I wonder, but I can't help but think, might there be an onion around or something that we might be able to throw in there, too? Oh, wow, even a leek? Oh, yeah, put it in the pot, Vicki. Thank you so much. This is great. What do you think, Ruben? Do we have anything else that might go in there? Oh, peppers? Fantastic. Wow, this is really shaping up. If you could put it in the pot. Thank you. Wow. That smells good enough to eat. And in the end, it turned out that stone soup was the best meal that they had had in a long time. The end. Now, do you notice anything in that story? It seems like the people's attitudes may have changed just a bit, huh? Now, in some versions of the story, the villagers even offer the traveler a lot of money for that magic stone, but she refuses to sell it and moves on the next day. So what do you think the people learned as a result? Now, some of us have been taught that the story of stone soup is about tricking a meal out of selfish people. But if someone asked me if I had a meal to share with them and I only had a few old vegetables in the back of the fridge, I would probably hesitate and say, no, I don't really have anything. And I wouldn't be lying, but I'd be wrong. So maybe the story is about people learning that they each have something to offer. And it's this story that they might not have been, much to feed themselves, but together they could help feed each other. And maybe it's about people who thought that they're powerless, but learned that by working together, with everyone just contributing the little bit that they can, that they can achieve a greater good. And maybe we can be reminded that we each have something valuable to share, always. So let's consider today that everyone does. And may we have the wisdom and empathy and compassion to see and draw out the gifts that are found in every person.
The art of blessing the day. This is the blessing for rain after drought. Come down, wash the air so it shimmers. A perfume shawl of lavender chiffon. Let the parched leaves suckle and swell. Enter my skin. Wash me for the little chrysalis of sleep, rocked in your plashing. In the morning, the world is peeled and shining. This is the blessing for sun after long rain. Now everything shakes itself free and rises. The trees are bright as pushcart ices. Every last lily opens its satin thighs. The bees dance and roll in pollen. And the cardinal at the top of the pine sings full throttle, fountaining. This is the blessing for a ripe peach. This is luck made round, frost can nip. The blossom, kill the bee. It can drop as hard as green useless nut. Brown fungus, the burrowing worm that coils in rot can blemish it, and the wind crush it on the ground. Yet this peach fills my mouth with juicy sun. This is the blessing for the green garden tomato, that first one. Those in green boxes of tasteless acid in the store sell in January. Those red things with the savor of wet chalk. They mock your fragrant name. How fat and sweet you are, weighing down in my palm, warm as the flank of a cow in the sun. You are the savor of summer in a thin, red skin. This is the blessing for political victory. Although I shall not forget that things work in increments and epicycles, and sometime leap that half the time fall back down. Let's not relinquish the dancing while the music fits into our hips and bounces our heels. We must never forget, pleasure is as real as pain. The blessing for the return of a favorite cat, the blessing for love returned, for friends return, for money received unexpected. The blessing for the rising of bread, the sun, the oppressed. The discipline of blessings is to taste each moment, the bitter, the sour, the sweet, and the salty, and be glad for what does not hurt. The art is in compressing attention to each little and big blossom of the tree, of life, to let the tongue sing each fruit, its savor, its aroma, and its use. Attention is love. What we must give children, mothers, fathers, caregivers, pets, our friends, the news, the woes of others. What we want to change, we curse, and then pick up a tool. Bless whatever you can with eyes and hands and tongue. If you can't bless it, get ready to make it new.
Good morning. It is so strange to take my mask off in public. Yay, but also so liberating. It is an honor to be here with you today, Church West. I'm, as Kathy mentioned in her intro for me, grateful to Reverend Denise, who I have known for more than half my life, for this invitation, and particularly grateful and honored to be with you when I know that you as a church community are in a time of great transition. I hope that the goodbye you had just yesterday with Reverend Suzelle fed your souls and gave you an opportunity to both grieve and to celebrate together. And I hope in the coming weeks that you continue that grieving and celebration process. The Art of Blessing the Day, which is the poem Reverend Denise just shared with us, is by Marge Piercy, who is one of my favorite poets. She is of Jewish heritage, and that poem is from a collection with the same title. I wanted Reverend Denise to share it because I know that in times of transition and in times of, heavy year 3 of a pandemic, figuring out how to claim our blessings can be a challenge. And knowing that blessing also means we can work together and pick up a tool is itself a blessing. But I really want to talk to you today, not so much about blessings as about our universal heritage. And so I'm going to start by telling you a little of my story. I was born in eastern Kentucky, and that's where I lived for the first 12 years of my life. My family and I attended Pentecostal churches, Assemblies of God for the most part. And while I did not know it back then, I was immersed in a theology of contradictions, a theology that espoused both eternal damnation and universal love. We were told that we were all going to hell unless we accepted Jesus as our saviors, and simultaneously we're told God made us all the same and loves everybody. Now, as a kid, I didn't quite pick up on the contradiction in eternal damnation, eternal salvation, and love, but I absolutely did become aware of the contradiction that existed because of my family's poverty, our location, in the idea that while we might be all the same in God's eyes, we certainly are not in the world's. And the tension between that universal truth that we are, on the one hand, inherently loving and loved, and the reality of the world we live in being made up of systems that deny not only our worth, but our very humanity. That tension between those two things, we all carry in us to one extent or another. And it is a tension that the forebears of our faith grappled with, and that we, as Unitarian Universalists, must grapple with today. How do we hold the universal love at the center of who we are as a people? How do we honor that our breath connects us all to each other and the divine, and value our particular lived experiences that call us to make the promise of universal love alive in the world? What loving actions can we take to, in the words of Piercy's poems, make the world new? To make it in the image of a just and holy divinity? Those are good questions, and they're big questions, and they might be a little bit too big, because if you are like me and you tend to be a big picture thinker and you lose sight of the trees because you're busy looking at the forest, you might get overwhelmed by how much there is to do. And what I find particularly useful when I'm overwhelmed by the forest is to find a tree to focus on, to circle from the universal into the particular and specific. And so, if you'll come with me a moment, I will share a little more of my particular story that helps me to grapple with that tension of universal love and our reality. Sometime in my early to mid-30s, I slowly became aware that there was something missing in my life, and something that I actually only recognized because of its absence. The recognition started this way. At social gatherings, in staff meetings at work, at cast parties when I was still an actor, at casual dinners with friends, I relished meals and unembarrassedly was the first person in line at a buffet, and realized that I was not approaching those experiences, I wasn't approaching food with a sense of dread, with urgency and panic inside. I mentioned already my family was poor, and growing up poor left a mark that I did not even know how deep it was until the wounds of hunger and food insecurity became scabs. I was 12 years old when we moved to Milwaukee, and my family attended local soup kitchens in order to eat. My 7-year-old sister thought it was just a restaurant that we and our neighbors went to a couple times a month. I was 15 years old the first time someone told me they didn't know what a food stamp was or what it looked like, and I remember thinking, how is that possible? I've had food stamps all my life. I was 17 years old the first time I ate fresh, whole, steamed green beans at a friend's house and had to lean over and whisper, "What is this?" because I didn't know. I was 22 years old when I ate mostly beans and rice and flour tortillas and was grateful for the free meal I got at a waitressing shift at a restaurant. And I was 25 when I got my first professional job, which earned me paid time off and a $25,000 a year salary, which made me feel rich. And I always had food in my house. And I was 35 years old when I realized that I wasn't panicking about food anymore. And like I said, that was the first time I knew that I had ever panicked about food. I am not sharing these stories to make you feel sorry for me or to make you feel bad or because I think that I'm special. I actually think that my story is very, very common. You know someone whose heart beats faster when they approach a dining experience. You know someone who is unsure of how they are going to buy groceries this month. You know someone who hasn't eaten fresh fruit in the past year because it's just too expensive. And in these uncertain days, with the harsh beginning of year 3 of this pandemic, which has wreaked havoc on too many lives, you may know many someones suffering from food insecurity. You may be one of those someones. When I consider my 12-year-old self and that soup kitchen we went to, what I actually remember is that it was St. Ben's. Some of you might be familiar with St. Ben's meal program on 10th and State in Milwaukee, which is run by the Capuchin monks. And they have been feeding people in the neighborhood daily for almost 50 years. And the needs of the people haven't changed that much, except to increase, especially during this pandemic. And the monks and the volunteers persist as best as they can. I know that this congregation partners with the guest house to serve meals to the folks there, that you financially support many organizations through your Share the Plate program, and so I know I'm not actually telling you anything new when I tell you how great the needs are in our community. Throughout Milwaukee and Waukesha counties, there are many organizations trying to fill those needs. The Hunger Task Force and Feeding America, Sojourner Family Peace Center, Pathfinders, and the Women's Center, Repairers of the Breach. These are just a few of the organizations that work to meet people in crisis, to provide them food and shelter. And even before the pandemic struck, the needs of people were growing. You might not know this, but many colleges all over the country, including, I know for a fact, 3 here in the Milwaukee area, MATC, Alverno, and UWM, all started free food pantries for their students the year before the pandemic. People the world over are struggling to meet basic needs, and the enormity of addressing those needs, like I said, it can be overwhelming. And while my personal circumstances or yours may be improved since childhood, and while maybe we are lucky to have not been too greatly impacted by the pandemic, what we know is that the systems have changed too little for too many. And what we know is that any social safety net we had built as a nation has been steadily dismantled in the pursuit of profit. And that the systems feel too big to challenge or too persistent to change. The systems sow a little sense of despair and inevitability in us. They tell us, well, this is just how things are, so what are you going to do? And that's actually another good question, because what are we going to do? How will we answer that there is a spiritual or theological reply to physical, material, economic needs that abound all around us? How do we move towards empowering action that makes real lasting change? There's lots of ways, of course, and I don't have an easy answer, but I know where I start focusing in on the small is by knowing that the problems we have, other people are grappling with, and people throughout time have found answers to them. So I turn to the wisdom of those who come before me. There is a saying in the Jewish Talmud that honestly grounds me, and I return to it probably once a week. You might be familiar with it, but it goes like this. Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now. Love mercy now. Walk humbly now. You are not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it. We don't have to complete the work. And that is a comfort, because we can't. But we can do something. And that gives me hope, because if we can do something, it means there is something we can do. And since we heard from a Jewish poet and we were reflecting on the Jewish Talmud, I'd like us to think on the acts of another Jewish teacher you might be familiar with, Jesus of Nazareth. I mentioned I was raised in Pentecostal churches, and if you're familiar at all with Pentecostal churches, you might be familiar with the fact that they are steeped in the Bible. And so I grew up full of biblical narratives and was deeply familiar and disturbed by some things in the Bible. And I don't even mean some of the wrathful God of the Old Testament. Because while I actually loved the stories of Jesus and how he hung out with the poor and spoke truth to power and helped the disempowered, which as a young, poor girl who felt really disempowered a lot, that was super inspiring to me. But there was a passage in the book of Matthew that always bothered me, and it bothered me for years, even after I stopped being a Christian. And it's a passage where Jesus and his disciples are talking, and he says to them in response to a question, "The poor will always be with you." And I remember thinking, what does that mean? Does it mean, as some people told me, that poverty is just inevitable and it's preordained by God and we just have to accept it? Does it mean, as some people said, God has a plan for everybody and so don't rock the boat and just be where you are and God's going to make it better someday? Did it mean, as other people interpreted, that if you were wealthy and prosperous, God meant you to be and you were worthy of that? Well, I didn't and I don't think it actually means any of those things. But I still struggled with how to make sense of it. How to make sense of it spiritually and theologically. And then a few years ago, I encountered an essay by the Reverend Liz Theo Harris, who is the director of the Kairos Center and the co-chair of the National Poor People's Campaign. And Reverend Theo Harris wrote a compelling essay on this very question: what did Jesus mean by the poor will always be with us? And in that essay, she talks about the ways in which Jesus' ministry was one of addressing oppression. That his ministry was in fact about standing in solidarity with the poor and trying to create systems that would end poverty and corruption and oppression. And so looking at the totality of his ministry and examining the contextual evidence of that statement, she says, gives us a different understanding. Because when Jesus says the poor will always be with you, he's actually referencing, Reverend Theo Harris says, the Hebrew scriptures in Deuteronomy where that say, if God's people follow God's commandments and live in justice and harmony with God's law, then there will be no poverty because we will have created just divine conditions here and now. Living in harmony with the divine means we have made beloved community where we all thrive. And so, if the poor are always with us, it is not because God demands it or preordained it. It is because we are out of step with what the divine wants us to be doing. If the poor are always with us, it means we have failed in our mission to create beloved community. And it is our mission, as Jesus and scriptures are saying, to do the work that moves us all collectively in the direction of justice, that moves us in harmony with the divine. We are not supposed to accept conditions as they are, but know that if the poor are always with us, if conditions of oppressions are always with us, then we just have more work to do. In the story of Stone Soup, which David beautifully shared with us, and I'm guessing, as David said, you're familiar with it, those villagers come to realize that they have more to offer together than they do alone. That their generosity and creativity, which were stifled by the conditions they were in, became sparked when they were invited to share what was in their hands to share. They couldn't separately actually make a pot of soup, but together they were able to feed their whole community and nourish not just the hunger of the body, but the hunger in their hearts. But that can be hard for us to see, that we have power in our hands. And it's especially hard in desperate times, and it's harder still to actually act on it when we believe we have power in our hands. It's hard to work against the dominant voice of our culture that upholds individualism and that declares scarcity as a fact. And it is actually easy and understandable that people believe the system when it lies and tells us that our little bit of salt or our one carrot or lone piece of cabbage is never going to make a difference to anyone or anything. But that is a lie. Because as the Talmud said, all we have to do is one act of justice now. And again, notice we don't have to do everything. Don't have to do it all alone. And actually, we cannot do it alone. The work of justice requires community. The work of making that pot of soup required the whole community. And even Jesus had a whole team he recruited to help him. Activist Margaret Mead once said, "Never doubt a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, it is the only thing that ever has." Writer Adrienne Marie Brown, in her what I consider prophetic book, Emergent Strategy, in which she calls on the wisdom of activists and community organizers, tells us that small is all. The only actions we can ever take are the small ones, and there is always enough time to do right work, even when it is small, because that work grows more effective in deep relationships that are cultivated by fostering mutuality and respect. We start small by knowing who we are and what we can do, and listening to others and learning who they are and what they can do. We talk to our neighbors and recognize our mutual needs, and then we work together not because we are going to save somebody, but because we together can make possibilities we could not imagine on our own. We make the promise of universal love real by acting with others and knowing that the lived experiences of each of us, knowing that how we move through the world influences all that we do and we bring. My own history of poverty and food insecurity shaped choices I have made in my life and how I interact with others. My sexuality, my gender identity as a cis woman, and God knows most certainly my whiteness have also shaped how I see the world, the ways I think, and what I can bring to the table. Just as your identities, who you are, what your particularities are, have shaped you. And so having a multiplicity of voices at the table, having people who can bring the carrot and the cabbage, who've mastered the art of blessing the day in each of its multitude of varieties, gives us a fuller picture of the reality we are living in, and means we can create a fuller picture of the world we want to remake. Each action and each person as their whole self are needed and worthy in the work. The work of building beloved community is what we are called to do by our spiritual hunger, by the needs of the world, and yes, even by our Universalist ancestors. In the late 18th century, which sounds crazy, but that's so long ago, and also like yesterday, but in the late 18th century, Universalist ideals began to propagate all over what is now America. And the early Universalist churches often espoused and lived a theology of human solidarity across racial, class, and gender lines. They were by no means perfect, but they were working on a vision. And so they taught, in the words of one early church leader, the absolute necessity of undeviating justice. One of the early leaders, Hosea Ballou, prophetically preached that the entire human family is drawn up into God's love in one moral community. We are created as one organic whole, and we are all, each of us, essential to each other, linked to the whole of humanity. Universally loved, universally whole, universally needed, together taking action to be in harmony with the divine. That is the vision of the early Universalist church. That is the vision Universalism calls us to still today, because when our Universalist ancestors looked around at the world and saw it burning and people enslaved and people starving, what they said was, hey, if we're all beloved of God, and we are, and if we're all saved here and now, and we are, and if we're all united in shared humanity and divinity, and we are, then how do we make that truth real here and now? They were never saying we're all the same, but rather we can all work together in love, for love, to make divine love real. And that work is holy work. It is spiritual work. The work of feeding people and ending poverty is spiritual work. The work of dismantling white supremacy is spiritual work. The work of tearing down body and gender hierarchies, which your Reverend Denise preached about last week, is spiritual work. Because our universalist theologies and values compel us to know that we, here and now, are sacred, that our breath is the breath of the divine, and no matter the shape or the size or the age, ability, color, or variety of body that moves through this world, the breath that moves through us all connects us and makes us holy. And creating embodied realities that reflect that divine truth is our spiritual inheritance. Our systems that denigrate difference, dehumanize us, and deny our inherent worth, they are causing economic devastation, ecological devastation, political devastation, and they are causing emotional, physical, intellectual, and spiritual harm that we are called to heal. A universalism that begins the conversation with "we are the same" and stops there, that does not recognize the place of difference in our embodied experiences, is an empty promise. It's a theology with no bones. To say, as my childhood theology partly said, God made us all the same and we just need to love everybody, that is an okay theology as far as it goes. But we, my UU siblings, we are called to go farther. We are called to go deeper than a shallow universalist message that erases the importance of difference and the lie of sameness. We are called to resist the despair whispering in our ears that our small committed actions for justice don't matter. We are called to work collectively to do what is in our hands to do here, now. Here for the absolute necessity of justice. Here for making the world new. Here to be in harmony with the divine. If it is my goal or our goal to change the entire system and the whole world right now, we will fail in that. That cannot be our goal. But if we focus on the small, actionable steps that are in our power to take, if we dream and imagine with others a more possible world and move in community towards that dream, if we plant seeds and harvest fruit and share that fruit with neighbors, that is what we can count as success. If we remember the art of blessing each moment, if we remember the story of stone soup, and yes, my UU siblings, if we remember Jesus, if we remember that we are all born worthy of love and dignity, that the divine moves in each of us and calls us to see the worth and dignity in each person we encounter, and we are moved to act in solidarity. And we might call that movement, whatever form it takes, a success. We can only do it not by looking at the entire system all the time, not by looking at the beauty of the forest, but by focusing on the trees, the tree right in front of us, by committing to a small action here, now. If you do that this week, what might it look like? Maybe for you, it is writing a letter to your legislator to advocate for raising the minimum wage. Maybe for you, it's donating blood. Maybe it's making a meal. Maybe it's wearing a mask. I'm not actually here to tell you what small actions you must take, except the last one, please everyone wear your masks. I'm not even joking about that. But I'm not here to tell you what actions to take, only to remind you that your actions matter. It matters to the person in front of you, and it matters for all the people who are yet to come. Because our spirits are hungry for the fullness of our interconnectedness, for the divine made real here and now. And so we need to feed our spirits with justice and love. May we each of us remember that we are holy and unique contributions to the universal blessing that is our life. May it be so, and amen.
It's a season of grace coming out of the void, where man is saved by a voice in the distance. It's a season of possible miracle cures, where hope is currency and death is not the last unknown, where time begins to fade and age is welcome home. It's the season of eyes meeting over the noise and holding fast with sharp realization. It's the season of cold making warmth a divine intervention. You are safe here, you know. Don't forget, don't forget, I love, I love, I love you. Don't forget, don't forget, I love, I love, I love you. It's the season of scars and of wounds in the heart, of feeling the full weight of our burdens. It's the season of bowing our heads in the wind and knowing we are not alone in fear, not alone in the dark. Don't forget, don't forget, I love, I love, I love you. Don't forget, don't forget, I love, I love, I love you. Don't forget, don't forget, I love, I love, I love you. Don't forget, don't forget, I love, I love, I love you.
UU Church West's Split the Plate program is one of outreach and generosity. Each month, we give half of all undesignated offerings to a nonprofit organization to help us live our Unitarian Universalist values and serve our community. Our Split the Plate partner for January is the Islamic Society of Milwaukee, or ISM. The ISM is the largest Islamic organization in the state of Wisconsin and has been in operation for over 40 years. It serves approximately 15,000 Muslims residing in southeastern Wisconsin. Of course, we all know about the Afghan refugees who arrived at Fort McCoy, many of them carrying little or nothing with them. Our donation to the ISM will be used specifically to purchase items which are needed by the estimated 400 Afghan refugees being resettled in Milwaukee. Items such as winter coats and boots and clothing for men, women, and children. To support the Islamic Society of Milwaukee anytime this month, go to the UUCW website's Donate tab and select Split the Plate from the menu provided, or you can text or mail your donation today using the information found here. Today, I thank you for your generosity to the Islamic Society of Milwaukee.
Friends, I want to leave you today with these closing words, which are from a fellow Unitarian Universalist, Joseph Cherry. This is titled, Prayer for Living Intention. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to be clumsy there, loving enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we, as a people of faith, be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. Blessed be.